Good morning, good afternoon for those of you who aren't on the West Coast. I am Nick Rishwain, and I'm the Vice President of Experts.com, and this blab is brought to you by Experts.com. Joining me today is one of our members, Jerry Birnbach, and he is a retail expert witness, retail stores, design expert witness. Let me give you a little bit about him. He's qualified retail accident expert. Thank you, Mike Sheehan, for all the props. I appreciate it. Jerry's been involved with many high-profile retail cases, lots of slip and falls, if I'm to understand that correctly, Jerry. He's a top 40 retail industry leader, according to DDI magazine, and a top 50 retail design firm, according to VMSD magazine. Jerry, as I understand it, you started off your career designing stores and arenas as an architect and sort of found your way into becoming an expert witness in retail. There's probably a lot of stuff that I missed, but can you go ahead and give us some more about yourself?
Sure. Well, it started many years ago when I graduated with 2 degrees in architecture, and the world of architecture was not doing well in that point in time. So I wound up going to a retailer who had requirements for some of my background. Their needs were to have someone who understands planning and do store design. It was a mass retailer. The greatest thing that ever happened to me was the fact that I stumbled into this particular niche because it's something that I chose to stay with for many years thereafter, and found that as a discipline, designing for stores was very unique because the bottom line was not about residential where it's a feel good and it looks good. Retail design is a very bottom line oriented type of design discipline where all of the design considerations really need to be made around product first. And our slogan from the get-go has always been design with merchandise in mind. And that is our biggest point of difference between us as store planners and architects and interior designers. Their tendency is to go first for the volume or go for the color. First assignment and due diligence is to say what product are we trying to sell and what are the dynamics of these products. And if you think about it, every product has a different set of parameters. There either is because of size, functionality, the way a person reviews them, tries them on, feel he touches. So every particular item in every store really needs to be investigated in order to come up with the right solution from a design merchandise point of view. The next issue, once you've gotten the product under control, is to try to design the store accordingly, and circulation plays a role. Well, I was fortunate enough in the beginning to take my education of architecture and incorporate it into retail, and I had some great teachers along the way who were leaders in the field of retailing who taught me about what to look for and how do you design the store. After 5 years of doing that, I went to the other side of the equation, which is the vendor. And the vendor is up against a lot of obstacles. The retailer who's demanding that things be done their way. And my job from the vendor perspective was to try to take our product line, which were accessories, and I was an in-house vice president of store planning for a vendor, and my responsibilities were to design displays that were appropriate for the product we were selling, but also had to marry into what the venue designs were. So it was very challenging. And you ran into things like Walmart didn't want to look like Kmart, and Kmart didn't want to look like Walmart. And from the vendor's perspective, if the retailer had their way, they'd put you out of business.
That seems about right. And
the trick was to come up with what appeared to be different, but through economy of scale, for instance, injection molding, which was a good alternative back then, we were able to change colors easily, but have the functionality of the displays correctly. So I spent approximately 10 years on the vendor side of the business, and then decided that we'll just jump off and do it for ourselves. And at the ripe old age of 38, I started my business and was very fortunate in having great clients from the get-go. And basically, I had two types of clients. I had the retailer who was looking to either start a new store, or when it came to the big box with Walmart, they had me working on specific store departments to try to come up with innovative and profit-driving designs. And the vendor's perspective was that they were being challenged by the retailer to come up with the next great innovative idea. And it brings to mind Walmart at one time actually turned over a store to every vendor that was in the store and said, here's the store, here's your area, now do what you think, Mr. Vendor, as the best solution for your product, which was an innovative, pretty interesting idea. Because if the vendor doesn't know how to show their product, then who does?
Right.
And, I was involved with that particular assignment, and it was very successful. And some innovative ideas came out of that. And over the years, I've had really interesting clientele, ranging from department store, drugstore, supermarket, a lot of entrepreneurial startups, a lot of chain operations who needed to have a template put in place so that they knew their costs were under control, nothing was changing from store to store, and they were able to budget these oncoming next year's stores accordingly without going over budget, and ruled their world that way.
Yeah.
So, to wrap up the story, so it was a combination of education, being in-house for a retailer, then going on the other side, which was the vendor. And in order to make my business more successful, I found very early in my career that most people don't place a value on design. They want something tangible, so they want to see the end product.
Okay.
So I thought the only way I was going to do well was to get involved with the production. So whether it was design a store and build it and help the retailer acquire whatever is necessary to build this store, or it was for the vendor to come up with a display design and then source it out to the right vendor manufacturer, who would then produce 1,000, 2,000, roll it out to every store. And that really gave me a great indication of how displays are made and how they interact with customers at store level.
Okay.
Dealing directly with the store, you learn the wants of the retailer in terms of an end product. So that's it, kind of in a nutshell.
And I imagine that the expert witness portion came from what you kind of just mentioned, the interaction between the display and the customer and how they interact and where injury may occur. Is that?
That's one of many.
One of many. Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me about some of the, because, in retail stores, what we most often see are your slip and fall or falling product onto a client, onto a customer. So maybe you can tell us about some more types of issues that you have addressed.
Well, this one is interesting because it's complicated.
Okay.
Because there were three parties involved. There's the retailer, there's the vendor, and then there's the individual who was injured. At the time, I was hired by the plaintiff to review what the situation was at store level. I would, like to backtrack for a second and set the stage, if I could,
Please,
in terms of what happens in a retail accident. Because it's kind of different, because there really are very few restrictions and codes and regulations out there that address retail. And what I mean by that is certainly when you build a store, you're compelled to comply with the local building department. And that's a set of rules. And normally that just deals in terms of the customer with aisle widths and lighting and fire exits and other safety issues, but it's kind of short and sweet. Then there's OSHA, which is another regulatory group that get involved more with the equipment that you might find in warehouses or materials being used or methods of storage and warehousing. And then the last one, which basically trumps everybody else, is the ADA Act, which again is there, but it's kind of minimal when it comes to the retail in terms of restraints on to the retail as it addresses customer safety.
So you probably have to review each one of these depending on state. And ADA is a federal law, but I'm sure there are state rules depending on where your particular case may be. Is that right?
Right, and California being the worst.
Of course, naturally. We get that pretty regularly.
One safe my earthquake design project gift. But so the issue becomes when you evaluate these cases, there's a ruling that has been established, and it basically states that the retailer has to provide a customer with a safe environment. The customer is considered as a guest, and the customer is invited into the store to utilize and enjoy the store. The obligation of the retailer is to make sure it's a safe environment. However, this regulation, or basically it might be a test case, really doesn't expect the retailer to provide a individual that follows every different customer to make sure that as they're walking, there's nothing that's going to affect them and cause an accident. What the regulation or what the understanding is that the retailer needs to make an attempt to patrol, control, oversee, fix within a reasonable length of time, not every minute. 15 minutes, 30 minutes, even an hour has been established as a fair amount of time to police and have some group go through a store and regulate it. And that's of slip and fall. I mean, think about it. Somebody goes down an aisle, they drop some liquid soap or whatever it is. And, you can't expect 30 guys to jump on the ball like it's a fumble. It's, it's there. And somebody from the store hopefully picks it up. Or sometimes it could even be picked up through their surveillance. And then, the code goes out, clean up aisle 4. And simple as that.
Yeah, interesting. And is that in a policy? That should be in a policy and procedure for the store itself.
That's very true. And that's where many of the retailers fall short.
Okay.
They fail to define the procedure in which they do this surveillance or this review, and that's where they get themselves in a lot of trouble.
Okay.
Because many retailers either don't address it, or if they address it, it's in a very haphazard way. And after you review their manuals and policies, you can see that it was never taught well to the employee. Because of the large turnover employees, it's never it never sticks. So you have to kind of look to the next level of management and say, well, certainly an assistant manager who's been there for 5 years should have been aware of it and done something about it, and so forth and so on. So back to now, that's kind of setting the stage.
Yeah.
What needs to happen and what happens normally. And also procedure of when there's an accident, what to do in terms of, do you move them? Do you sit them? Do you call 911 immediately? Do you fill out a report? What does the employee who's first on the scene do when they have this accident? And then what does the store itself do as a follow-up, and what does the company home office do as a follow-up? And that's another area that becomes gray. And there's one particular retailer that you must take anything that had to do with that accident off the floor, put it in a safe place so that it can be reviewed at a later date by both, legal parties.
Mm-hmm.
That's not often done. And
Okay.
therefore, it leaves the plaintiff in a dark hole because they can't even go back to which display was it or which product fell on me.
Okay.
And that starts to create issues. And then when you get to discovery and you ask for these things, they disappeared. There's a trend that surveillance video gets recorded over.
Mm-hmm.
A request that that a copy be maintained, then you've lost the surveillance. And, then it starts to become he said, she said.
Yeah.
And so that's not good either.
Right.
And
We had in my convenience store days as a young man, we had the habit of, if nothing happened in the last 24 hours, now granted this was when we were using VHS, you just use the tape again the next day. I'm sure you still see items like that occurring. Is that what you mean about it being recorded over? Maybe not on VHS, but no need for more memory or something like that if we keep reusing it.
Yeah, but from a neutral party, which I am, it's interesting how when you represent the defense retailer, the video is always available. When you're on the plaintiff's side, nobody can.
That doesn't surprise me a great deal, but it is kind of funny from a neutral standpoint. And I don't mean to get you off track. You were going to tell us about one of your more fascinating cases, and we sort of set the stage for it.
Right. This was interesting because, as I said, it was complicated. There were a couple of parties that were in the equation. A vendor display, which normally is developed when there's a special type of product, and an example usually is jewelry or sunglasses, because the actual product has a very unique way of being shown. Let's take sunglasses as an example. It needs to, the glass itself needs to be, on something that holds it out like that in front of the person so they can see it, take it off, and be able to put it back on easily.
Okay.
So it's not uncommon that when you see a sunglass or a reading glass, magnifying glass in a drugstore, supermarket, discount, that there's a display that's showing it very nicely. And 9 times out of 10, this display was generated by the manufacturer. And this display could cost in the range of $200. And when you have a 1,000-store chain, we're now talking about a number.
Yeah.
So
a significant number. Yeah.
Retailer expects the vendor to pay for, and the vendor has acknowledged and accepted that as part of the cost of doing business.
Sure.
So the vendor goes out and generates this display, trying to keep the retail in mind. It needs to be this color, this size. Then once they get through that part, then there's just the basic rules of a display. There's a base that should be a certain amount off the ground. Is this base going to be put on the retailer's end cap? And for those who don't know what an end cap is, it's the portion of the, if we take a supermarket or a mass retailer as an example, when you're walking down the aisle, the first thing you see coming at you is the end cap. And as you start walking down the aisle, you start to see what's called an inline presentation.
The end caps usually at this time of year or most times of the year are some sort of the special display because they're offering a special, right?
Prime real estate.
Yeah, prime real estate. Okay, good.
Everybody's walking by it straight on, so you can't miss it.
Right.
It's a favorite place, and part of the vendor, if he's going to give an ounce of blood because he's paying for the display, the least the retailer can do is give him the end cap.
Okay.
So in this particular case, the retailer gave this vendor the end cap, where the vendor ran amok, I think, is the fact that the vendor tried to do a one-size-fits-all, where if all I have to do is generate 1,000 of these displays and I'm good to go, I can send them to everybody across the country because I've set my dimensions so they'll fit on anybody's end cap, and I've made it so that it's the right height, and so forth and so on. And more importantly, on the other side of the equation is it's holding enough of their product so that they can make the return on investment over a period of 2 years or so. Because the first year almost is going to be a non-profit scenario, because in order to recoup the cost of the display, they have to sell about $4,000 worth of sunglasses. In some cases, it's not a problem. In other cases, it could be a problem. So the vendor looks at it for the long haul, and the retailer just wants to get the right presentation out there. It doesn't bother asking their own internal store planning staff to come up with the display. They just turn to the vendor. Okay. The normal retailer, in doing so, will have a review process where they ask the vendor to make a model, a sample, bring it in, a committee comes and looks at it, and each one looks at it with their particular point of view. The merchandiser makes sure that it shows product well. The store planning department makes sure that it's dimensionally going to fit and look good within the store. And if there's safety or shrink kind of, which is stealing a type of review, that person's on the committee as well. And after the committee looks at it and goes, God bless it, it's perfect, then it's sent out to the store.
Okay.
In a rollout. It's either sent with the product or without the product, and the store loads it. That was another issue, because who was the person that put this in place, that loaded the display and didn't see the inherent problem that happened? Right. So there was a little bit of investigating, trying to get down to, so how did that happen? Was there this initial review process? And once we got through this initial review process, when it got to store level, what happened? Many of these vendors have what's called a service company that comes in or handles these displays across the country, because they've got representatives all across the country who are used to loading displays and dealing with them and coming into the store. So it almost like we have now a fourth party involved if there was a service company, because there was a certain amount of onus and liability on their part to make sure that the display was installed correctly.
Okay.
So with all the characters in place, the issue was as follows. A woman is shopping the store with a shopping cart. She is walking down an aisle towards an end cap. Okay. And she decides that she wants to go right, so she goes right. And because the base of this display was not high enough per what I would call industry standard.
Okay.
The shopping cart, instead of, I'm good at demonstrations.
Perfect.
Wait, where are we? Okay. All right. There we go. Okay, so here's my shopping cart coming down the aisle. And now it wants to make a right turn.
Right.
But because this was not at the right height of space, it was lower, the shopping cart was able to go over the base.
Okay.
Now, the purpose of shopping cart bumpers is that it's a standard dimension. And it's something that, even though there's no written regulation other than I found it in the Army,
okay,
that the industry over time has established this dimension. Bumpers are made for shopping carts at 6 inches, and the major display manufacturers like Lozier, who's one of the largest metal gondola companies that make all of these displays you'll see in Walmart or Wegmans or some supermarket, they set their base at 6 inches so that when the bumper comes in, it bounces off of it. And how many times have we been in a supermarket where our eyes are trained to look at the product, not the floor?
Right.
We're just running along, and all of a sudden we bang into the bumper, and our normal response is going to be just to turn it around and keep going. It keeps us from getting into trouble. It not only keeps the cart where it's supposed to be in the aisle, it also keeps the cart from not banging into product on the shelves and having things launched because I'm doing 30 miles an hour with my cart and they knock into cans.
No, I'm supposing in this instance when the shopping cart hit the bumper, are we talking about it's dragging something?
No, it missed bumping.
Oh, missed bumping.
And went over the base, and the back wheel of the shopping cart locked itself onto the side of the base.
Okay.
The woman pushing all of a sudden is held at a complete halt.
Okay.
So her normal reaction is, all right, I'll pull back.
Right.
Now the front wheels lock up on the front of the display, but because the front wheels pivot, as she's pulling, the pivot gives out and she's automatically flung backwards just from momentum.
Okay.
Falls on the floor with the shopping cart on top of her.
Okay. All right.
So one looks at this and realizes that the fault was the fact that the base was not the right height.
Okay.
But had it been, I forgot one other piece of important information.
All right.
The shelf on the end cap is called the base deck. Now, had there been a base deck and this display would have been put on top of the base deck, we wouldn't be talking about this accident.
Okay.
Base deck would act as this bumper to keep the shopping cart from doing what it did.
Okay.
The base deck was either removed when this display showed up, or it never was there to begin with. If it was never there to begin with, then the vendor should have known that and made the base higher. And if it was there and removed, who authorized this to be moved?
Okay.
So there were several scenarios of what went wrong. But the obvious thing that went wrong is the display caused the problem.
Okay.
In the accident. And it was the first time that I've been in a deposition with three attorneys representing three individuals.
Yeah.
And it was pretty interesting to watch the dynamics of that going on.
Because now we're trying to establish who's at fault for the display. Is it the retailer, the vendor, or the display maker? Is that who's or just retailer, vendor, and plaintiff in this one?
Well, you could take it to because there's also a dynamic going on between the vendor and the manufacturer.
Okay.
Because screaming, I've got 1,000 to make. So you can find a way to take money out of this thing so I can afford it.
Yeah.
But at some point, the manufacturer has to turn around and go, hey, I'm not going to be responsible for the liability of this display because you've had me remove so much integrity out of this display that I can't stand behind it if anything ever happens.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of dynamics going on.
Right.
It would appear to be a very simple scenario.
Right. Right.
It became very difficult to, you really had to get all the facts and get the whole timeline of what happened from beginning to end, so that you could see where the crack that things fell through occurred.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
I can paint you a picture now where the retailer is of no fault at all. I could paint you a picture where it's the product vendor's fault. I can paint you a picture where it's the manufacturer of the vendor display, but that party is so far removed.
Right.
Go after it is not the way to do it.
And how did this just out of, if you know, because I know experts don't always know how a case turns out afterwards. Oftentimes they're not involved after they've done their part. But do you know how this case turned out? Do you know the result? Did the plaintiff win?
And the plaintiff was satisfied.
Okay. All right. And this was settled, or did it go to trial?
Didn't go to trial.
Didn't go to trial.
I find that most of these do not go to trial.
It's been our experience, about 95% or more of the cases today just do not go to trial. Probably more than 95%, though I haven't seen more recent stats. And I'm talking about civil litigation specific. So let's talk about, and Mike or Jay, if you guys want to jump in and ask a question, please do. We have an open seat now, and we'll take one at a time. I think you're okay with that, right, Jerry? You were okay having, yeah. So if you guys want to jump in, please do. What other, my experience in grocery has been convenience stores, and of course, when I worked at law firms where we would have the slip and fall type of case. But what other injuries or accidents have you seen in your career, other than your standard slip and fall or falling product?
I recently dealt with a situation where tires that were being stored in a auto supply chain store, there were definite rules and regulations in place in terms of how do you retrieve this tire. However, the retailer placed the access to the public bathrooms where you utilize the same aisle that tires are being retrieved from and your customer access to the bathroom. As the customer left the bathroom, the tire wound up on her head because the staff member did not follow policy.
Okay. In the retrieval of the tires.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
There were some real inherent design flaws, I felt, in the way the store was set up and situated. And then, of course, there was the obvious should not have been retrieved and the method in which it was retrieved.
Okay.
That's another example.
Okay.
The other one was everything that the store had set up in the theory was good.
Okay.
But, as most humans try to do, there's always shortcuts. And in doing the shortcut, they let themselves be exposed to liability.
Okay.
And that was as simple as I keep doing more and more, there's really interesting phenomenons that occur. One of my, I do every once in a while some guest lecturing, and one of my ways that I like to open up my seminars is that people look, but they don't see. And what I mean by that is that the eyes are very deceiving. We see it every day with magicians. There's these optical illusions, and we're all guilty of it. Some are better than others in terms of really seeing when they look, and others just brush over vistas and don't really take it in. So in this particular case, a woman slipped on what appeared to be soap on the floor, and that could have occurred by a bottle that opened up in somebody else's cart on their way out, and that person didn't even realize that it was dripping on the floor. However, the woman was walking down an aisle, and her feet went out from underneath her.
Okay.
So the store, which is a well-known chain store, has in their procedures, and they follow it, that there's an employee who walks the store on a basic routine cycle, day after day, and they may switch off on who the person is, but there's someone always walking the store looking.
Okay.
But what I found out and realized this particular trip is even I was guilty of the fact that I looked at LLC. I never realized the impact of the very shiny floor and above hitting the floor. Because what happens is there's almost the equivalent of a mirage.
Okay.
You look way down the aisle, the light almost appears to be water.
Yes.
Until you
I
walk
know
up
what you're saying. Yeah, I've experienced that. Yeah, I know what you're saying.
it's dry as a bone.
Yeah.
So this particular store, in their method, this particular staff member, in their method of reviewing the store, and we're talking, like 110,000 square foot store. That's a lot of legwork.
Right.
And I give them credit because they try to emphasize more on the food side than the apparel side, because food is more likely to have the liquid falling than the apparel side.
Right.
So we're really doing good. They put more time into the food side. They're walking around the stores. Everything was good until you interview through deposition this particular staff member. Go, okay, so explain the process in which you review the store. This particular person reviews the store by walking around the perimeter aisle, looking down the sub-aisles for about 100 feet, and then comes to a middle aisle and goes up the middle, and then looks left and right as they go up the middle for another 100 feet to the right, 100 feet to the left.
I did my job.
And now they've surveyed the store.
Right.
But when I did that, all I saw was water, 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 because the reflection of the light on these aisles made it really difficult to determine are they wet or not wet. And I would imagine that over time they've just jaded themselves to the point where it's the light.
There's no chance it's wet. I know that that's the light.
The light. So that was really a terrible fallacy in their methodology.
Right.
Which I found that kind of interesting, and it was eye-opening for me.
Interesting. Now, and you brought up another thing. Again, I told you I've had some background with grocery stores, but you brought in a comment that made me think, what type of accidents, injuries, or design issues happen in apparel type of, we've talked about tire retailer and grocery retailers, and what might be an occurrence in an apparel store? What type of hazards? What's that?
Who come to mind?
Okay.
Just to name.
Yeah, name a couple.
One is a child in a well-known junior department store.
Okay.
And a junior department store is not your Nordstrom's, Neiman Marcus. It's the other ones,
okay,
like a JCPenney, Sears.
Right, right. And I don't expect you to name sources. Right. I understand that.
But that's an example.
Sure.
So the child happened to be rambunctious and running all over the place, and without looking, ran into what's known as a face out. Excuse me. And the face out is a square metal bar that product hangs on, and they're known as, they're known as four-ways because the bars come out in four directions, and you hang the clothing on it. And the purpose is so that you can see product from the face as opposed to what's called shoulder hanging.
Uh-huh.
Because many products you're going to buy because of something, the application, the logo, something is great that's going on the front, so you want to show the front. When you get to in that, because color is what's selling the item and not anything else. So these face outs were in the junior department, and the child was running a little crazy and ran straight into one of these face outs. So there's a little bit of liability on two parts. One is the mother watching the child,
right,
6-year-old, but it still doesn't relinquish the fact that why was the face out so sharp that it did a number on the child's head? And when you went to review the face out, it was obvious to me that it was I won't use the country, an Oriental import. And unfortunately, it's another example of the vendor and sometimes the retailer trying to save that last 25 cents. So instead of grinding the metal and rounding it and smoothing it, they just cut it and leave this razor sharp edge exposed, and they don't concern themselves with that. Well, that's an accident waiting to happen. In this case, it did happen. Another display item which I recently ran into is similar in the sense that the Oriental manufacturers are not known for their quality control. And the way the display is designed, it's called knockdown. So it comes in parts like a Tinker-Toy set.
Okay.
It's got metal uprights. It's got a square base. The uprights go on top of the base. You take a screw and you come in from underneath and you tighten it up, and everything is beautiful for about 15 minutes.
Okay.
Because of the lack of quality control, they don't, or the lack of 25 cents, they don't use a lock nut when they assemble this. And as a result, when you start moving this rack and you get the shimmy of just it going back and forth, these screws start to work themselves out. And now you've got this going on with the upright of the display.
Right.
Now, add the new heavy coats of the winter, and instead of distributing the weight on both sides, they overload this side, and you've got this going on. And that was a problem that an individual who was just easily handling an item, and perhaps someone was on the other side of the display, we don't know. But the bottom line is that this display completely tipped over. Had the upright been fastened and stationary, you would not have been able to get enough moment onto this upright to have had the display come over on you. But the minute you got this pendulum thing going on, it just went. So that's a 25-cent solution, which unfortunately I find very often is the culprit when it comes to why there was an accident or not an accident.
Yeah, interesting.
So that's the display part of the equation.
Okay, and I want to pause you there because we've got a couple of good questions here from Jay Garrett, who is known as the lending lawyer. He is correct me if I'm wrong, Jay, but he's a little like me. Although he practiced law and I never did, he has gone on to do more enjoyable things. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Jay. And he asks, which is not an uncommon question, but how do you establish a trust level that supports your expert status rather than a perceived hired gun status, especially for jurors? And it's a great question, and probably one you've been that an opposing counsel has tried to make you out as a hired gun in the past, I'm sure. How do you address that?
One way is the fact that expert witness represents 5% of my business.
Excellent.
I've got ongoing entrepreneurial startup store design and vendor display design. So the bulk of my business is everything but dealing with the expert witness piece of the equation. Mm-hmm. That's one. The other one is that I've been fortunate enough to have, I wouldn't say it's a great distribution. It's certainly not 50-50, but at least I've got a 30-60 plaintiff defendant list of cases I've been involved with.
To avoid appearance of bias, essentially. You want to be able to have as best as possible, you want to have an equal plaintiff and defense.
Right.
Yeah, and, excellent.
That's basically the two things I try to emphasize. Yeah,
I think those are great answers, and thank you for asking that, Jay. And I was wrong. Jay had 20 years litigation experience, and now is in the collections industry. I thought I didn't know you gave it 20 years, Jay. Good for you. He has another question here, which is another, I think, good question. What are liability issues you consider, and you may be new to this issue, regarding live streaming video by customers in retail and grocery establishments? So, for example, what we're doing right now is live streaming. There are some other applications of live streaming. Jay, can you clarify, do you mean the customers doing the actual streaming, or the retail establishment doing live streaming of customers? Maybe you can clarify in the chat box. Yeah, customers doing the live stream.
Wearing a Go camera on your head? What?
Well, or what Jay and I are sort of into is there's a couple of apps right here on your phone, so you can walk around doing. I don't know if you've watched The Prophet on CNBC. Marcus Lemonis, I've seen he actually went through and looked at displays in a Walmart at one point, not a Walmart, but a retailer, I think. So somebody like myself might be live streaming, hey, here's the product I'm looking at buying. Here's another product I'm looking at buying. And Jay says some stores are supposedly prohibiting the practice. I would think from my own perspective that they'd want to prohibit the practice because I may not be paying attention where I'm walking and paying attention to who I'm talking to, who's on my live stream. But have you had any instances with live streaming, or can you think of any liability issues that might happen there? It would be private property, so maybe they wouldn't want somebody doing a live video from their property in case some sort of accident were to occur. Maybe they only want their video their video cameras to be the only video on the premises. I don't know. It's a great question. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it.
Well, I do, but I don't think it's relevant to what I do. But
not what you do. Not yet, at least.
I will say this.
You say what?
I said I will say this about that. Okay. I think that if we rewind 8 years ago, because I used to have to do, just as part of my due diligence when I'm doing a new store, I'd go to the competition and take photographs because I want to see how they're doing it.
Sure.
Especially if they're a successful operation. And so you would get picked up for espionage when you were doing that. Occasionally I get pulled into mall offices and reprimanded for taking photographs, period. But I think once QR codes and barcoding was easily accessed on mobile devices, then it became a different concern of the retailer. I think it still boils down to pricing and where am I going to buy it from? And their big concern is what we call showrooming. And the only objection the retailer would have, I guarantee if you surveyed retailers, the last thing on their mind right now is somebody walking into a display and getting hurt. This whole concern is all about, are they going to buy this damn thing in my store, or are they trying to figure out who's got it cheaper in the neighborhood, and if they've got it in stock right now, and if so, is they running a sale on it, and can I get a rain check if they're out of it?
Right. Interesting. That's a great, and probably where I've read about that being a major concern. And can I get it online cheaper if I don't need it right now? Right? Can I just get it online, get it delivered to me?
If there's any friction at store level, it's got to be over those issues, and not is we're going to get hurt.
Okay. So do you think if they're prohibiting streaming, as Jay has told us that he's hearing, live streaming, maybe they're prohibiting.
It's never going to stick.
Right. Maybe we're trying to prohibit the use of. Excellent. Good question, Jay. Thank you for that. Well, we got about 10 minutes left. Jay, did you want to pop in? Are you busy? Did you want to ask a question on video? Or do you have any other question? We got about 10 minutes left. If
I
he
will tell
doesn't
you
pump,
one worker that might be of interest to you. There's an
okay.
organization. There's an organization in our industry called R. It's now consolidated. It used to be Popeye, which was the Point of Purchase Association of America, and another part of it was NASFM, which is a store fixture manufacturers. They're kind of coming together now to try to create an organization that represents their best behalfs, whether in government and otherwise. And one of the things I proposed to them is that we really don't have a place to hang our hat when it comes to retail liability, because nobody has established these guidelines and rules that everyone can buy into and say, you know what, this is good. I'm for it. I'm Walmart. I agree. I'd like to have my stores doing what you're suggesting, and we're going to implement it and get this unification throughout the industry of safety issues so that we don't have all these unnecessary accidents. And I'll tell you, I'm amazed by the amount of accidents I am seeing. And I'm also amazed at the fact that the management within the store allowed it to even happen, because it was so avoidable that it's crazy. And all it to me is that nobody really wants to pay attention. And it's like that Detroit mentality. If my brakes fail on 12 cars, so I'll have to pay out 12 liability cases, but at least I don't have to recall 1 million cars. Right. I really believe that that's the mindset of retailers today. They're willing to take on these skeletons in the closet because they just see it as a bottom line scenario. And if it wasn't for the ADA Act, you'd be seeing 2-foot aisles still in stores. And I'll never forget back in probably 78, as a store planner for this retailer, I get a call because we're concerned about our shopping carts getting into the parking lot. So we put up these barriers on 2-foot centers so that the shopping carts can't get any further than the sidewalk, and that's it. And I get calls from handicapped people in wheelchairs saying, you know, have you ever given any thought to how do I get into a store? And the honest answer is no. I never did.
Yeah, interesting.
And I feel bad about that. You know, nobody had to twist their arm to realize that we've got to make provisions now, whether it's a gate or otherwise, for them to be able to get in. But they have been for so many years neglected, and it was always a bottom line thing. You think retailers want to put in handicap compliant bathrooms? They're a fortune. So,
right.
But the law said you got to now. And I think you need some of this regulation in there, because kids are walking into peg hooks and losing eyes. And, you know, it's not funny.
No, that's not funny.
And I see pictures of these injuries. And I'm working on one now where a woman lost a leg falling. Oh. And it's like, whoa, you know, it's bad.
It's very easy from a layperson's standpoint when they see a slip and fall case or a medical malpractice case or something like that. When they see it in the news, it's very easy for them to think that somebody's trying to get a freebie until you really know the facts of the case and how serious an injury may be. You can't really make that assumption, you know, but that is oftentimes what people see with those types of cases. But when you get into it and you know the facts of the case, you get to understand how serious an injury could be. And Jay has a last question here, and then I'd like to wrap it up with you and let you tell people where to find you and all that. But Jay says, is the problem you're addressing there, I think at the end, is that a training issue for local store management or at the corporate level, or is it a combination? It seemed like you were saying there is no overarching retail guideline. Is that?
Well, it's a good question, and it's an interesting answer.
Okay.
And I'm not so sure that it's not true of other industries, but there is definitely a line of demarcation between home office and the field.
Okay.
If you ask any field member, they'll tell you that the home office has their heads up their place, and they don't know what they're talking about, and what they're asking for is unreasonable, unnecessary. And if you talk to the corporate people, the field people are, one level above high school, and we're lucky we have high school graduates, and we're doing the best we can with what we got. And they're two opposing forces, and
working for the same
people. I may have had like ridiculous comments by buyers over years, because I used to deal with them all the time, that, well, why would I want to take that on? Because it's going to make the other buyer more money, and that's why you've got stores missing. That's why companies have gone out of business, because they got so big and they got so self-centered. They forgot that there was this one entity that's keeping everybody fed with salaries.
Right.
And we'll overcome that. But get back to the question of training. It's about enforcement. It's about making it part of the religion. If you look at Apple as an example, who in my estimation does as good a job as anyone in terms of staff hiring, training, consistency, going the last mile. It's mind-boggling to go into a mall that's dead as doornails. Like around Christmas or after Christmas, go by the Apple store, you can't get through the front door. What is going on in that environment and mentality that's creating this? And it's all about, it's all for one and one for all, and that's beautiful. And until you get that kind of feeling within these areas, it's not going to happen. The corporate's making an attempt to make things safe. The store says you got 40,000 things you're asking me to do. That's number 39,999 on my playbook, and I'm not getting there, going there. And if and that's that. But a good store manager should really be addressing customer safety, because ultimately, when you get enough accidents in the same store, people are not going to come in. So he's shooting himself, or she's shooting herself in the foot when they ignore these things. But that's why I felt that in regulation, if they can't do it for themselves, and they sure haven't, then somebody's going to need to do it for them.
Sure. Interesting. Oh, great. Well, this has been excellent, Jerry. I'm glad we did it. I'm sure there will be an opportunity for us to do it again in the future, because it's such a wide variety. I sort of concentrated on grocery to begin with, but there are so many other types of retailers that I'm sure we could go into. People can find you where if they need your services. Please tell them your website, how to get a hold of you.
Website is www.expert-retail-witness.com.
Excellent. And I'm going to go ahead and post that here at the bottom.
I have a question for Jay.
Is he still here? Yeah, go ahead. He's in the office, so he'll have to probably type it. He couldn't join.
Does he know if the abalone are running?
Does he what?
Know if the abalone are running?
Oh, I don't know. Jay, do you know if the abalone are running? I'm not sure I get the reference. So, again, you can also find Jerry on Experts.com. All of his contact information is available on our website. You find his website, and the next link down is his profile on Experts.com. He's got an article up there. This video will be up there, will be linked to his profile shortly once we get it into a YouTube version. Thank you again, Jerry. I really appreciate it. And I am going to stop the recording. Thank you very much.
All right.